Well, hello there. Today I have a deck profile from this week's little project, which is the Blue Purple Crocodile Baroque Works themed archetype that's going. I was really excited to play that deck, but there's not really a solid list going around or anything, so it's definitely a homebrew deck and kind of like a pet project, really, that I was really interested in playing. So this week's, project was testing that deck out. Last week's project was Doflamingo, and this week's project is the Baroque Works deck. And this past locals, I went to it. It was 4 rounds, and I went lucky enough to go undefeated. Got another winter promo, so I think the build is relatively solid. So I'm happy to share that with you today. And that's kind of the pattern for the next couple weeks. I'm going to spend probably like a little bit, like a week or a little bit over a week, week and a half, maybe 2 weeks on a deck, and just kind of mess around with it, slowly improve it as time goes on. And then we'll move on to a different idea so that I can go ahead and just get my toes wet in every single deck that's relatively possible. Other than decks I might not want to actually mess around with, like decks like Green Kid, for example, right? I don't personally really want to play the deck, and there's so many lists and pretty much set like ways to build it. There's not much room for innovation for the most part in that deck because it's been so focused on. I kind of want to spend some time with the, ignored and underrated leaders and deck ideas that aren't getting a lot of attention, and I can give it the attention that it could deserve if it ends up being a relatively cool deck that not only can actually compete, but is something different, so you're not stuck seeing the same decks over and over again. Because if you've been paying attention to the metagame, the decks that are being played are red decks, which are Zoro and Luffy, more Zoro, but Luffy is still playable. Purple Kaido is everywhere, and Green Kid is everywhere, and then everything other than those decks is kind of niche. Even, blue decks that I think are relatively good, like Doflamingo, aren't being played as much because they have a very... You need to know what you're doing. They reward a well timed game plan and execution, and they punish a player who's not sure what's really going on. And that's why I think those decks aren't being played a lot. I think they're very playable. You just have to spend time in order to play them. But that is pretty much the game plan in the coming times for the channel. I'm going to go ahead and take a week or so and just play with a bunch of different stuff and see how things go. But for today, I am going to present to you my fun Baroque Works style deck featuring Blue Purple Crocodile. And I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you there. Thank you. Hey guys, welcome back to another deck profile. Today I'm going to be showing off my Baroque Works Blue Purple Crocodile deck list that I've been working on the past week, and I hope you are excited to see it. Before we get into this, go ahead and give me some love for the channel. Go ahead and like the video if you want to see more deck profiles. Go ahead and subscribe if you'd like to keep up to date with what I'm up to. I plan to bring you a lot more fun decks, that's for sure. Going into the leader, we have our Blue Purple Crocodile. I'm looking forward to trying getting my hands on that old Dark Crocodile leader because it looks so good. But for now, this one does, miraculously, the same thing as the good-looking one. Now, this leader isn't being talked about very much, but its skill is very impressive. So, with a Dawn under him once per turn, if you have 4 or less cards in hand after you resolve an event, you can draw 1 card. Now, why do I go through the trouble of saying after you resolve an event? So some events, especially in this deck, will change the hand count after they resolve, which can make this skip over, like not proc, not activate. So I'll go over that. Hopefully I remember while I'm going through the cards. Because I'm not, I'm not the most savvy in recording videos and all that. It's pretty new to me. But this is a fantastic leader. You can get a lot of value, a lot of draws over the course of a game. It's kind of crazy how many cards you get off of this when playing the deck. You get so many draws that the 4 life in this deck in particular is almost non-existent. It's like, oh, big deal, I have 4 life, but I drew like 8 cards. So what is the 5th life really doing for me besides maybe taking 1 extra attack? The card that you lose by not having the 5th life is irrelevant completely. But starting with the deck profile, we're going to go right into the bread and butter of the deck. So that's going to be the events. I'm actually going to do the events first for this deck. So we're going to start off with 4 of the Baroque Works event. So this is your starter card. I say starter card because you can play it, as soon as the game starts. But, ironically, this is also a very good card mid to late game, and a card you can possibly hold because it works with your leader. And in the early game, getting to a low hand count is actually kind of difficult. Because you're low on Dawn, you haven't been attacked yet, So don't worry too much about trying to proc the Crocodile in the first few turns. It's going to be kind of difficult. But this is like your Nami, and stuff. You like to check top 5 for any Baroque Works type card, so you can get events and characters, add it to your hand. And this is one of those cards that changes your hand count. So if you play this on 5 cards in hand, if this is your 5th card, when you get your search, you're still going to have 5 cards in hand, so your Crocodile won't proc. So if you're trying to get that draw, make sure you have under 5. That's how you get the value from it. This card becomes a free cost from a character that I'm going to explain later. It's recyclable with a character that we're going to get to later. So you can really get a lot of searches and a lot of value off of your Baroque Works. Next is our small event in the Desert of Sparta. So Desert Sparta is a very, it's a very efficient card. So cost 1 gives you 2k, and then you get to look at the top 3 cards of your deck and rearrange them. But when comboed with your leader, put them right here, you can actually draw any card off of the top 3 cards of your deck, which is really good. So in the middle of your opponent's turn when they're attacking you, you get to check the top 3 cards of your deck, stack the card you want to draw, and then draw that card immediately during your opponent's turn. So I like to stack like the 2k counters with this, and then immediately draw them after this is done. It also has a trigger, which is a fine trigger actually. Draw 2 cards and trash 1 from hand. So usually if you get this off of your damage, you actually kind of want to keep it because it just works with your leader so well. But if you don't have Dawn up and you say you're in a tight spot and your hand's a little bricked, you can go ahead and trigger it. Next up, I'm going to go over the bread and butter of the deck. And the bread and butter of the deck is actually not a Baroque Works card. It is Love Love Beam, or Love Love Mellow for the translation. This is the best card in your deck. It is recyclable with a card that's later, so you actually play more than 4 copies of it. The only downside is you can't search it because it's not a Baroque Works card. So I play 4 so that you can hard draw it consistently, because you only need really the 1 to start, getting into the whole loop of things. But for 2, you gain 4k, and then if your hand is 3 or less, you get to draw a card. So, you have an event that lets you draw a card, and a leader that lets you draw a card. That seems like a lot of draw, and you would be right. So if you have 4 cards in hand, this being your 4th card, when you activate this, you'll go down to 3. You'll gain 4k, you'll draw a card. And then your leader will proc, because after this draws, you're going to have 4 cards, and then this procs, and you draw another card. So when you set up your hand correctly, every time that you Love Beam, you're going to draw 2 cards and gain the 4k, which is kind of nutty, actually. So this comes up a lot, especially against Kaido, because they got the big beaters, they're going to swing that bat at you. It happened in round 1 where the 9-drop Kaido was dropped on me, swang for 10. So I drop the Love Beam, go up to 9. I draw a card. Then I draw a card off Crocodile. Then I drop a 2k on top of this, and I'm 11. And I drew 2 cards off this. So I actually, technically, I blocked a 10k, hard guarded it, for 0 card investment, because I drew 2 cards off of this, and I used 2 cards. So I still have the same number of cards in my hand. And when you do stuff like that, your opponent just kind of goes, what just happened? But it's really funny. This card is everything in this deck. Takes a lot of sculpting, a lot of planning, because you want to get maximum value. So you need to set up your hand at 4 cards or lower, so you get the 2 draws. But when you do, it feels so good to get that much value off of this card. But don't get too greedy, right? Like, if you're stuck, right, and your hand is relatively big, like 5, right, and you're like, oh no, I don't get the draw off this, it's okay. I mean, you're still going to get the draw off Crocodile. It still replaces itself. Don't just take damage because you can't get maximum efficiency. So, the last 2 events is 2 copies of Sabers. So this is searchable in the deck because it is a Baroque Works style event. It's recyclable, so 2 copies is no big deal if you need more of it. But this is the event from the blue starter deck. So for 4, you get to return a cost 7 or lower to the hand. You can set tempo with this, you know, if they play a big guy like the kid blocker, not the magnet kid, not the 8-drop, this doesn't affect it. But the blocker kid kind of gets punished by this a lot. And the other reason for this was I wanted another event that I could play on my turn. So Crocodile skill is once per turn. And since events function as, you know, counters and like normal spells for your turn, you want to get as much value out of this as possible because that 1 Dawn is going to stay there for, you know, you and your opponent's turn. So if you play an event on your turn, you draw a card. You pass over your opponent, you play a counter, you draw a card. So I kind of just wanted to take advantage of that, and this was like the event other than Baroque Works that I wanted to play as a couple more copies of something I could play during my turn. Baroque Works is definitely the main one you're going to play, but Sabers is pretty good, especially late game. So that's our events. There are 4, 8, 12, and 14 events in this deck. And that's kind of like my sweet spot right now. I would say. I was playing a bit more in the very first build I put together, but you don't want to clog on events. You want like that sweet spot. You want the one where you're like, I have an event one event every turn for the opponent's turn, because every time after you play the first event, you're not going to get the draw. So those are not going to replace themselves. So you only want to try, if you can, to play the 1 a turn, and then like hard guard with the characters, which is why we play the 2Ks in the deck still and all that. But now we get to the characters, and we're going to start with 2 Perona. We play 2 Perona in this deck because the room, you know, space issues really won't allow for, and she's not, you know, the most amazing in this deck like she is in Dofi. Doflamingo, she's absolutely cracked, but in this deck, it's more of just trying to get your engine going and not bricking in the early game. So 2 is perfectly fine. She still does the check top 5, so you can sculpt the next few turns. But in this deck, the Desert Sparta is the better card because it triggers your leader and everything. Whereas this in the Doflamingo deck triggers the leader, so that's the better card, you know. So we just play the 2 of her. Next up is you know, an all-star in blue, or because every color besides purple can play these, which is the 1-drop blockers. So 1-drop blockers, you kind of just fit 4 into all your decks. Like, I would definitely recommend just playing 4 of the 1-drop blocker in any deck that can play them. You know, green has Capone, red has Chopper, blue has Law, and purple does not have a 1-drop blocker. They have a 2-drop blocker, it has guards, it's not, but that's a whole other story. But these cards are really good. You don't have to play them early, you can save them. 1 Dawn investment, just put 1 Dawn to the side during your turn. At the end of your turn, just drop it. You know, no big deal. In this deck, it's a little different. You want to leave like 2 up and then for your events, and then leave 1 up for this, so you have to plan your turn accordingly. For our first Baroque Works member, we have 2 copies of Mr. 1. So, Mr. 1 is a 2 of because he's a late game card. His effect is with a Dawn under him during your turn, he gains 1,000 for every 2 events, 2 in the trash. So keep that in mind, it's every 2. If it was every 1, he'd be absolutely massive. So they had to they made sure it was every 2. So normally in the late game, he swings for like a 7 or 8k, which is fantastic on a 2-drop. Like let's not underestimate how good that is. But in early game, he is terrible. He's a 2-drop 3k. Like, he's not going to gain a lot of attack. The game just started. So I want to see him late game, so I only play 2 copies of him. He's good when he's good, and when he's bad, he's a 1k counter. Thankfully, they gave him counter, because sometimes they just don't give cards counter, which really stops them from being good cards. We're playing 4 Alvita as our 2k counter. She has an effect, it's not super relevant, but it is there with a Dawn under her. When she attacks, you can trash a card from your hand to control the board a bit. You can bounce a 3 or less. In this deck, it's very interesting, this effect, because it lets you control your hand, which isn't bad. And it lets you do a little bit of board control. So this card probably can get played more to the board in this deck than it could in, say, Dofi, which is interesting, because when controlling your hand, in the early game especially, you can get to that 4 sweet spot, or you can start drawing off your events, and while controlling the board, is definitely not a bad trade at all. Like, the trashing a card from your hand in this deck doesn't matter because of how many cards you're drawing. So definitely keep her in mind in the early game. You might actually want to commit one. And then well, I was going to say the best Baroque Work card in the deck, but it's hard to not say it's Crocodile, but it's hard not to say it is Miss All Sunday, the right hand woman. This card is probably the closest I would say to a cracked card. In this deck, you know. There's plenty of cracked cards in the game, but in this deck, this card is crack. So she is a 3-drop, 1000 blocker with 1000 guard. That's good just in general. And you're like, but it's kind of expensive for a small blocker to be 3k. Well, that's because her effect more than makes up for it. It says on KO, if your leader is Baroque Works, which is the blue-purple Crocodile, and also the pure blue Crocodile from the starter deck, if you want to go that route, you can get any event from your trash to your hand when this is KO'd. Let's think about that for a second. Any event. It doesn't say Baroque Works. And that is the first thing on your mind. Yes, you can recycle Love Beam, and we do that all the time. So this is what lets you play the double dip. You know, you get multiple uses out of a single event card because this can just keep getting it back. So that's how you just like never run out of Love Beams. And once you get one, it can help you draw into these or more Love Beams. That's why you just want to hard draw the one copy because you cannot search it. And it's on KO. So not only is this effect fantastic in general, but because it's on a KO, you can force it because she's a blocker. If they tap her before she blocks, because it's not on block, and they run her over, you still get it. If you're fighting purple, and they nuke the board, or who's who this, or king this, you still get an event back. She's just very, very good. A fantastic rare. Looks great with the foil. Always play for this. 100%. Next up we have Mr. Tubonplay. So this is the other 2k counter that we play 4 of. But he actually gets played to field early game in this deck because you're playing a Baroque Works deck. So his skill is with Adoniderm when he attacks, check top 5 for a Baroque Works event, add it to your hand. There's actually not that many targets. There is 10 targets for Tubonplay. 4 Baroque Works, 4 Desert Sparta, and the 2 Sabers. Unfortunately, this can't get your Love Beam or else it would be absolute cocaine. But that's why we play 4. You're going to hard draw it. What I've found is because you only play the 10, you can't just keep getting value off this card. Usually in the early game, we're talking turn 3 when it can attack, so you commit it like turn 2. You get your 1 search, and then you just kind of let him die. And even if he doesn't for some reason die, you're pretty much, you'll start whiffing on the effect, which is a shame, but it does happen. So most of the time, you play this down if you haven't seen your events and you just kind of want to get your engine started. But if you don't play him, it's fine. He's a 2k guard. And your Baroque Works card can search it, if nothing else, and you get a nice 2k to your hand. Next is my little blue package of choice. It's not Baroque Works, but I just really like the combo, which is 2 copies of Smile and the 4 Caesar Clown. I just really like these cards. They're very value efficient. As Caesar Clown dies, Smiley comes out. Smiley gains 1,000 for every card in your hand. You usually have 4 to 5 cards in your hand at any point in time in this deck. So he's always going to be like a 7 or 8,000 attacker. If you draw Smiley in the early game and have nothing else to play, it's a threat. Just slap it down. You can swing for like 7 at something. Not much more to say. They're very simple effects. I just like the cards. Next up we play 2 Mihawk. Mostly because I just wanted a couple more 2k counters. But he does help you unbrick because of his attack skill with Adoniderm, draw 2, and trash 2 cards from your hand. There is absolutely nothing wrong with an effect like that. But for the most part, you know, as long as your deck is working, he's guard. Nothing wrong with it. I'm playing 2 copies of Virgo. He's just a nice big boy. He has guard, so if you don't play him, he's still useful for something. But, you know, this just helps you apply some more pressure, because this is a very defensive and passive deck at times. But you can't win by being passive. You need to have offense, and he gives you that. Next is the only purple card I play in this deck, which is 2 copies of Queen. This is the only purple card that I could fit in this list. It's a very tight list because you're playing a Baroque Works style deck, and all the Baroque Works cards are blue. So I was like, I want to splash purple, but there's really no room right now that I can feel. What's a purple card that I want to play? Queen is like the best purple card in a splashable deck. For those of you who don't know about Queen, he's a 5-cost 6k blocker. He has guard, which is fantastic, and on play, Dawn -1, draw 2, and then trash 1. The reason I'm only going to play 2 of him is because I don't want to play this early game, because there's no ramp in this deck. So you want to only play him in the very late game when you're already at 9 or 10 Dawn, because then it doesn't matter that you neg 1, you're going to get your 10 on the following turn. Playing this early game can mess with your Dawn ramp, and you don't want to do that. But he's an extra blocker, he's big, he can be an attacker. All around good card. And then the final big bad boy of our deck is the Sir Crocodile himself, the Croco boy. So don't be mistaken with this card. This card is extremely powerful, it's extremely good, but is by no means the linchpin of the deck. And what do I mean by that? So this card is a character, so it can be outed. It can be outed relatively easily, actually. Green has a bit of a problem outing it, but red can just Otama Jet Pistol it. And purple, you know, obviously you just drop the 10 and everything dies. But at least the 9-drop can't kill it because he's a 7. But this is not the linchpin of your deck. The linchpin of your deck is your leader, and nothing's happening to your leader. So no matter what, your deck is going to function. This just lets you get extra value. So he has Banish just statically. So if he touches your opponent's life, it goes straight to drop. They don't get the resource, which is very nice. And then, one thing that's, before I even go into the effect, he has Guard. So let's take a moment to appreciate the fact that this 7-drop boss monster has Guard. That is kind of rare and is very helpful in this deck specifically because it lets you manipulate your hand. It's almost like they figured that needed to be there. Very good on Bandai's part. But his main skill with a Dawn under him is all your blue events give -1 cost. So, going back through the events now that we have this in the mix, Baroque Works costs 0. You just play it from your hand like a spell in Yu-Gi-Oh! Desert Sparta is 0. You play it during your opponent's turn for 0. And then your bread and butter card, Love Beam, costs 1. A 1-cost Love Beam for 4k and a draw. And then, of course, it affects your Sabers too. So Sabers is a 3-cost with this on the board. Now, let's just take a minute to appreciate how amazing that is. And if for some reason, somehow, it doesn't happen very often, if you just want to get super greedy and you stick 2 of these on the board and Love Beam becomes free, I don't know if there's a way you can lose that game, but pretty great. Just the 1 for these making free is fine. Like, it almost feels like playing more than one of these to the board is almost just like win more. That's how bad that is. But you definitely want to try and get as many of these in your hand with your Baroque Works and stuff early game, because it doesn't matter, you can guard with them. Because especially against the red and purple matchup, you have to just expect one of these to just die. And you just get blown away. It's a shame, but you know, it's going to happen. And this ult art, oh, this ult art. I love this ult art. It looks really good. But you just want to touch them and you just banish their life. They don't get their resource. It's really, really good. So that's my little list for the Baroque Works style deck. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a couple things as I told you some interactions between the cards and my ideas of when I was putting the deck together. Go through the matchups real fast for you guys. We had a 4-round locals. It was best of 1. And round 1 was against Kaido. We actually went into time, which is normal for this deck because blue decks in general go for the long game. But we went into time, I was able to not win in time. I was able to, you know, get that last hit in before, you know, the end of the game. So that was good. I don't like winning in time. Round 2 was against another purple Kaido. And that was actually a very awkward game. So normally this is a very passive deck, but that game, the cards that I was dealt, it was just like a slugfest between Crocodile and Kaido. And when he went to go for his kill turn with the Dawn -7 and go for game, I was able to just hard guard the 12. I was able to just hard guard that kill turn because I had 2 up and whatever. So he wasn't able to kill me, and then on the crackback, I was able to kill with the 7-drop for Banish, so his last life didn't go to his hand, and then I just slapped all my Dawn on Crocodile and just went in. And in round 3, we went against Odin, which was an interesting matchup. Odin had a tough time just dealing with the fact that I had so much raw guard. So he could tap all my blockers with the green card, the green utility cards like Cat Viper and Izal. But then I would just hard guard from hand like the Yamato. And then the Yamato wouldn't be able to get value. And then the last round we fought against Zoro. Zoro is, always a hard matchup because they can really, really like go in, the early game with all their little 5s and 6s. Very important to keep your cool in that matchup. You just kind of want to try and control the board as much as possible, and then just accrue resources by drawing cards off your events during the game. Yeah, it was a very nice time playing a very fun deck. Don't go half-heartedly on this deck, though. You do need to be aware at all points in the game, your hand size, what's going on the board, how aggressive you want to be. This is not a deck for the faint of heart. But I think that's just kind of the thing for blue in general. It's not a very aggressive deck. If you're an aggressive player that wants to just kind of, play cards, go for face, blue is not the color for you. You definitely want to try out blue and see if that kind of style of play is what you want to do. For a question of the day, though, what is a deck that is, kind of underrated, not talked about, kind of off in left field, that you might want to see me mess around with? If you give me a hit in the comments, maybe I'll think about putting a build together, testing it out for a week or so, once I'm done with the ideas that I'm currently working on. See how it goes, Nothing wrong with that. That's what I like to do. Other than that, I think that's about it for this little deck profile. I really hope you enjoyed. I hope this can be used as a skeleton if you wanted to mess around with not only the blue-purple Crocodile leader, but the Baroque Works style engine. There's a lot of potential in this leader, so this is just the archetype, right, for Baroque Works. You can build like a good stuff blue-purple deck where you're just like trying to just value really hard. And then my Smile deck idea uses this leader because it gets a lot of value. There's tons of potential with this leader, and you just have to mess around and see what's best. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you got some good feedback for this, and I'll see you in the next one, guys.